Thanks for coming out on a Saturday night. As you can see, the school is actually not at its liveliness on Saturday night, so it's great to see so many folks here, and especially on such a beautiful day. I'm Christian Simsarian. I'm the chair of the Interaction Design program here at CCA. We're in our first year, so we just started last year, and we have a fantastic group of sophomores, which I'm going to tell you a little more about. And just welcoming you all here. How many folks are students? Oh, excellent, excellent. And how many folks are professionals out there from the world? Right on, right on. I'd love to have you guys here. We really want to make this a forum where professionals and students and anyone else who's interested in excellence in interaction design can come and be together. So tonight, if you've recognized this, you're in the right place. We have Jeff Gothelf talking about LeanUX. And I want to just say a few brief things and show you actually a wonderful video clip of something that's emerging about our students. But our educational mission here is to develop a new specialty, a new human-centered specialty in interaction design, with students, professionals that have deep skills in behavior and system design, with enough visual design to communicate and enough technical skills to demonstrate. So that's how we're defining and redefining interaction design. And my big hope is that the interaction design program here becomes the gold standard for what an undergraduate BFA in interaction design is. So, and I welcome and invite all your help in making that, whether you want to be a reviewer or a mentor or possibly teach. I'm going to be recruiting for a bunch of new teaching positions in May. So if you're interested in that, please send a message to ixd@cca.edu, ixd@cca.edu, or contact me on the IXDA Ning site. Actually, before I do that, I want to show you this little video, which is really lovely. So here we go.
It's a really small group of people. I think it's something like 13 to 15 of us. And we have like a super close relationship with our professors and Christian, the chair, and everyone involved in the program. So we get to be a part of the program, and at the same time we get to offer a lot of feedback, and feedback that I feel that is actually listened to and implemented within the program.
It's like a story class and like systems class and research. And before it was, like a visual interaction design as well, and now I'm taking electronics class and processing.
My favorite aspect of the program is getting to use this skill set that is tied up with interaction design in a really meaningful way that engages with the world.
I didn't think about storytelling as a part of profession, but it's like really awesome, and it makes sense once you studying, learning why and what.
So on one hand, you have to have a really delicate understanding of technology and how technology works. But on the other hand, in order to humanize it and make it something that's useful, you also have to have a sense of creativity. You have to know how to make that work for humans and for people. So by requiring sort of a mix of both, I understand technology, but also understanding humans, you get interaction design.
There's like this special excitement that you get when you really feel like you made something awesome. And I guess I've just been feeling that a lot more often lately. And that's really all I can say about the program. It makes me feel awesome because I'm making awesome things.
We actually didn't make that video to be a marketing video. We made it because, this is just a few clips from the video we are making, is we want to document something that there's only one first, and there's a special moment where we're really trying to do something new with interaction design, and we wanted to capture that before it, 3 years from now, we're like, oh yeah, of course there's an interaction design program here. So that was just a nice few clips that I had asked the filmmaker capture so I can show to our board next week. So I thought I'm so excited about it, I want to show it to you guys. So just going back to this. So the advertisement here is we're having our sophomore show on May 2nd at 7 p.m. There's going to be a reception here. So the student work will actually be up in the what we call the Timken reception area out there, and there'll be beverages, and hopefully a lot of really exciting people will be here to see the students' work. And the students a number of them are still looking for summer jobs. Our official internship program starts after junior year, but a number of the students have excellent skills and they'd love to get some practical experience. So if you're looking for what you might call a junior design intern, there's a bunch of really qualified students who would love to work with you. So getting to our talk tonight, I was just consulting with Jeff, and he was saying, this is a really advanced talk about kind of what practice is in the world and how or interaction practices in the world and how it's changed over the last, let's say, decade. And so if you don't have context for that, if you haven't practiced the old way, you might kind of get lost in the speed bump. So I wanted to say just a little bit to the folks who haven't practiced that I can say from my personal experience. I started out as a builder, and then at future research labs, where the thing was the demonstration. You would build augmented reality or build robots within some kind of virtual reality that you could control from halfway around the world, and you really had to build that and show it. And then I went to IDEO, and there was just this amazing, this was about 10 years ago, just amazing design craft going on. And so much detail and so much care for every piece, element of time. So we say that interaction designers are designing in the material of time and technology, and all of that felt like it just needed to be codified, because there was on the other side, the people that were going to build it were people who expected a spec and build to spec. So there was a long period of creating specs that had to be exactly what you wanted it to be, which of course is really hard when there's all these things in the milliseconds and timelines and things going up and down. And then as things like Ajax came in and there was all these behaviors became just as fundamental, you started to move to movies and Flash. And just to all the folks out there that have never had to go through this, there are specs this thick that you would hand to engineering teams who would then try and absorb it, which of course they never did. And, well, rarely did. And then they would try and build that, and then other sort of factors come in the way. And it, I think, was often a disappointing experience on both sides. The designers would put all this work into this craft, and the engineers would put all this work, and nobody ended up quite being happy. Over my time at IDEO, which was about 10 years, we built a software experience practice. And more we started to see that the projects that were really successful were the ones that we were building directly with engineers, skipping the whole bureaucratic thing, the waterfall of taking a spec, handing it to another team who then stamps it, handing it to another team who then sort of puts their mark in a different way. And at some point it goes through quality assurance and makes it out to a model where you're actually sitting side by side with someone. And at the same time, that whole thing has to be reinvented, because partner programming, Agile, these sort of movements that were happening in the technical community didn't necessarily take into account design. They were about rapid development, working in sprints, which could sometimes be a week instead of a 3-month build. And then we started to work really hard. We said, well, we have to be next to you. And that's been a kind of informal way of trying to figure out what works, what's the right time wave in order to make that stuff work. And I have to say that in the consulting business, the spec delivery business was definitely a good short-term business model, and that we probably sold $20 million or more of these big phone books. But in the long term, what you really want is your stuff to get out there in the world, and you want it to be right. And so Jeff is somebody who I think has really started to bring that message together, bring a lot of the best practices together, and really starting to get the message out of how we do this in a way that it's just like, yeah, that's it. Please bring all that together. Please bring that practice together. And he's writing a book I believe it's in the final editing stage. It's going to be coming out hopefully in September, which with O'Reilly, LeanUX, which I think is going to really give people a reference to really start to bring this partnering with the people who are more technical into our practice, and also for the people who are more technical to understand what it is that designers want to see out of this. So Jeff was the UX director at The Ladders, which was a design-led service for career. And he's a founding partner at Proof, which is a company, a design firm focused on bringing LeanUX to its clients. So with that, I'm really, really excited. We've been in conversations for, I don't know, it's been a while. Since August, when I said something in my talk about getting students out of the spec delivery business, and somehow the Twitter sphere connected us, and I think I was actually re-quoting him, something that I had seen somewhere. So it's just a really great honor and pleasure to introduce Jeff.
Hey everybody. Oops. Great. Thanks for that great intro, Christian, and I'm really excited to be here. This is, there's so much change going on in interaction design and user experience design, and one of the things that has lagged behind in many ways is the process of interaction design. And just to clarify, throughout the night, I may switch between UX design. You may see that in a slide, interaction design. I recognize that there's endless wars about what it should be called and what disciplines are part of which thing. And so forgive me if I jump back and forth between terms because I don't really care. Because we all know what we do for a living, so or what we're learning. So that's good. So I want to talk about this idea of lean user experience and give you a little bit of background on kind of the spec delivery business that Christian mentioned, and how that was initially a good thing, and then how that became problematic, and then give you some insight from my experience, specifically at The Ladders, and how I kind of arrived at this notion of a lean user experience process, and define it. And we'll go through a definition of what it is and how to do it. And then at the end, I'll go through a case study of where things, you'll see the beginning of my talk, where things were when we got started. I'll go through a case study of where things were sort of towards the end of my stay at The Ladders and the progress that we made and how that was working for us. So jumping into it specifically, these are deliverables, right? These are interaction design or information architecture deliverables, UX deliverables. And for many years, UX was a deliverables-focused practice. You know, the interaction designer or the information architect made a sitemap or made a wireframe, and that really worked out well for us. That helped define the practice. People, you know, at the beginning of the practice itself, people didn't know what an interaction designer would actually bring to the table. You know, it was very clear what an engineer did. It was very clear, perhaps, what a graphic designer did. It was very clear, you know, what a marketer did, perhaps. But you know, interaction design, user experience design, IA, these things were not terribly clear. The documentation itself helped us say, this is the value that I bring, and this is what I do, and I organize information, and I make it findable, and you can actually use it. And that's great. And what's happened, you know, that documentation turned into these specs that Christian talked about, these phone books. And just to give you an example of if you've never seen a spec, just for the record, this is a page from a document that I created, I think, in 2003 when I was working at AOL. And what I want to point out here is that you notice that every single pixel is specced out. Every corner radius is specced out. Every gradient is specced out. Every link is specced out. Everything. And this is what we did. We would construct these documents, and this was the output of user experience work. We would hand these giant documents off, and this was how we defined products. And by the same token, this was how we defined user experience design specifically. And what's happened over time is that, you know, the complexity of the interactions that we work with has evolved like Mario himself. He's gone from little 8-bit guy over the years to 3D crazy guy over there. And the complexity of the experiences that we've had to describe in these documentations has gotten increasingly greater, and therefore the complexity of the documentation has gotten increasingly greater. And what's happened over time is that people started to value the documentation. So the practice became defined by the deliverables and the documentation itself. And then specifically, you got hired and compensated and measured. The quality of the work that you did got measured by the quality of your document, right? Not the quality necessarily of the product that you were designing. So if you could draw a straight line and pick your tool, OmniGraph, Visio, Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop, whatever tool it is that you want to use, right? If you could draw a straight line and make a beautiful wireframe like this one that I made, right? You could get hired, right? And you can get and you can say, wow, look at my beautiful wireframe. But if the end result of that experience looked like that, right? Then this is useless. This is absolutely useless. No matter how beautiful it is and how straight the lines are and how the corners are nice and crisp, if this is what you're looking at the end, then it's useless. And so I started thinking about this, and as I was kind of going through my career, and I started managing teams and building practices, and still our focus was on this documentation. And what kept coming up is that there had to be a better way. I had to figure out how to get, especially even when I joined the ladders, it was still a very spec-driven, very waterfall process where it was, define the requirements, design for 3 months, build it, make sure it's not broken, maybe do some usability testing, find a bunch of bugs, launch it anyway, and then hope that you'll fix it in phase 2, which never happened, right? That was our world. But in building these teams and building this practice, there had to be a better way to do this. But unfortunately, I was busy with something else at the time as I was trying to figure this out. And what that was an Agile transformation. So the ladders where I was working was this waterfall shop, this very sequential process of working. And they started applying Agile. And Christian mentioned Agile. And the gist of Agile, and I'll go through a really, really quick definition of it in just a couple of slides. But the gist of it is that you take the work, you break it down into manageable chunks, and you build in these short 1 or 2 or 3 week cycles. The problem is that there's, first of all, design has never been accounted for in these processes in the past. And in addition to that, there's no time to create the kinds of documents, the documentation that we had traditionally made, these thick specs, and that thing that I showed you from AOL, right? That we didn't have the time to do this. And so I was struggling to figure out how to get my user experience team of designers and writers to work in this process. And so we really had no idea what we were doing. And so the people who were teaching us how to do Agile said, well, you can't do specs, and you got to have a board. It's like, all right, well, we have a board. So we put up these physical whiteboards. And what happened was the physical whiteboards started to take on the support mechanism that the spec gave us. So these became requirements boards. So you can see the cards have requirements on them, and they were resource allocation. And these are the people that are on there. And they were project planning, like basically these are all specific phases in the process, and I'll show you this slide right here. These were the headers of the columns. So I think it stood for use case, test case, IA, design, copywriting. All the waterfall processes that we had to go through before were simply codified on the board itself, and then these were, yes, we did this phase, no, we didn't do that phase type of thing. So instead of having a spec and a project plan, all those things, we simply just put it all up in this crazy board. You can imagine the maintenance of that particular thing. We try to make it fun, by using funny avatars and Britney Spears stuff, but it wasn't fun. This was basically looking. What happens with that spec that document, that deliverable, is a support mechanism, right? It's a safety blanket that you wrap around yourself, and you're like, it's in there. If it's in there, then it's going to get built. So I feel good as a designer. And so we were trying to utilize the boards within that same way. We hadn't really shifted the way we had thought about working in this new environment. And this translated specifically into our wireframes as well. So we were creating wireframes, and again, we had to leave the specs behind. And so this is what our wireframes ended up looking like, was annotations after annotations after annotations, because we couldn't put these in subsequent pages, so we just put them all in one page, right? And then had subsequent pages like this. And this was really as bad as it got. And we were pushing the team to do this, and figuring out how to work in this short time frame environment where they couldn't actually document and design everything at the same pace. And then I walked in one day, and my team gave me this. And I'll just let this soak in for a couple of seconds, and I'll point out some of the highlights. Pay close attention to the title in the top left-hand corner. And where all paths lead to here, right? The team was so pissed off at me, and they were so angry at having to work this way that they went off on their own and put together this flowchart of anger, basically, right? Right. These are the designers venting. Now, granted, it could have been nicer, I suppose. They didn't have to use Visio, right? But in any case, what they've done here is they've taken all the reasons that they hated working this way and why they like working the other way, and all the paths lead to the center. And so if you highlight some of these things, right, working this in these short time sprints, the best experience never gets built because there's no time to design it and refine it and make sure that it's the right experience, right? And because of that, the user experience team doesn't feel like they're business critical because they're not doing their best work. So they're coming in, they're doing the best that they can, but not the best work. And so we're not business critical, we're just basically wireframe monkeys in many ways. These Agile projects never ended. So the nice thing about the spec projects and these waterfall projects is that you go through these individual phases in serial order. You launch the project, you have a party, you get a t-shirt, and you move on to the next project, right? I have a drawer full of project t-shirts. They're great for the gym. But these Agile projects never end. They're just 2-week cycles after 2-week cycles after 2-week cycles. And so where's the done aspect of this? And that was very frustrating for them. No ideation time. So you have to keep engineers working at all times. So every 2 weeks, you've got to give engineers something to do, right? Because God forbid they sit idle. So there's no time to ideate. You just have to generate, to produce, to be a production designer. And then finally, there's this concept of minimum viable product, which essentially is the, depending on how you define it, and it's misunderstood in many circles, but the idea is that what is the minimum fidelity and feature set that you can put out there that's not going to piss your customers off, that's going to solve your problem, and in many cases you can move on from, which is not what it's originally intended for. And so this was where we ended up. And so again, figuring out how to get out of the spec business, and then figuring out how to make all this work in Agile, drove us to this. But after a while, it dawned on me, and this is the key. This is the key, is that we were still following traditional user experience interaction design processes. And by traditional, I mean in that waterfall way. We had not shifted the way that we were thinking. We were simply trying to accommodate the old way of working into this new paradigm of shorter time cycles and getting projects out there faster. So that was the key here, is to understand that fundamentally we had to rethink the way that we were doing user experience design. And the epiphany is this, right? In fast-paced environments, Agile environments, it doesn't matter what process you're actually in, but in a fast-paced environment, the traditional UX process is a bottleneck. You know, waiting for all these steps to take place, making sure you have handoffs and sign-offs, and then beginning the spec creation process. It is a bottleneck to moving quicker, but you have to bridge that understanding with the rest of your team. And so how do you do that? And so the idea is you have to change the way you think about doing design work, because as these complex experiences, wow, this thing's just clicking away. As these processes are evolving, and as the projects that we're building, the products that we're building become more complex, we have to start communicating more complex ideas. So how do we build all of these things together? And the way that all this comes together is this concept that is called LeanUX. And so this is my definition of what LeanUX is. You'll see a couple different definitions out there, and they're all similarly titled. But the idea is that LeanUX is inspired by the ideas of Lean Startup and then Agile development theories. And I'll go through those definitions in just a sec. And it's the practice of bringing the true nature of design work to light faster in a cross-functional, collaborative way with less emphasis on deliverables and a greater focus on the actual experience being designed. So true nature of our work is the actual experience being designed. Okay? I'm not sure about how many of you that are students that are studying to design documents, right, that describe experiences. That's not the business I got into. That's not why I design products. right? The true nature of design work is the actual experience. And so if you can work in a lighter, faster, cross-functional, so you're working with different disciplines, in a collaborative way, you start to move away from the idea of deliverables. You still need them. You just don't need as many or as thick. And you focus on the actual experience being designed. So quickly, just I'm not going to go through a whole definition of Agile, but just to give you a sense of where these ideas come from to define Agile specifically. Agile was defined on a mountain, literally, in Utah by a bunch of software dudes 10 years ago, and they descended from the mountain with these, essentially these 4 bullet points is what it boils down to. And if you've ever met any of those guys, they're wacky, wacky individuals. But this is the Agile Manifesto boiled down into 4 points. We value the things on the left more than we value the things on the right. It doesn't mean we don't do the things on the right, but we'd prefer if we did it this way. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That just means talking to your team, right? Working software over comprehensive documentation. It's everything we're talking about tonight, and we'll get through that. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So instead of getting into the legalese and refining, well, you told us you do this, but you didn't do that, let's just talk about it and figure out exactly what we each need to get the process done right. Responding to change over following a plan. That's the key. In the waterfall world, in that serial spec-heavy world, you'd start at A, you'd have a destination B, and heads down, come hell or high water, you're marching towards B. The idea here is that we're going to lift our heads up every now and again, every sprint, 2 weeks, and say, hey, what's going on? Are we still on the right path? Are we still building the right thing? And if not, it's going to be okay to shift direction. Now, the idea of Lean Startup is being pioneered and brought to the world by a guy named Eric Ries, who lives right here in San Francisco. He wrote a book called The Lean Startup, which is a New York Times bestseller, and you should absolutely get it because it's applicable to any environment and every process. And this is just one quote from the book. And it says, the Lean Startup methodology has a premise that every startup is a grand experiment. And the question that you're trying to answer with that experiment is not, can I build this software, but actually, should I build this software, right? And then there's a question around building a sustainable business. But what's interesting is that the experiment, it's not just a theoretical inquiry. It's not just a test. It's actually the first product. And when you take this philosophy and you apply it to interaction design and user experience design, it starts to make you think about, well, how can I prove out these ideas? How can I work in this lighter, more nimble way, this more agile way, and then how can I answer this question? Should I even be designing this product? Right? Because again, in that spec world, you just designed it, heads down, for 3 months, and then handed it off. And there was no question because somebody had defined it up front for you. Let's ask ourselves this question: should we even be designing this thing? Because when Lean came from Toyota manufacturing and cars, and the idea was to remove waste, unnecessary waste from the process. And part of this is don't design or build things that people don't want. And so when you apply this to user experience design, these are philosophies and not necessarily methodology. So I want to show you what the LeanUX methodology looks like, and I'll walk you through specific steps about how to execute that. So these are Jeff Gothelf originals, should you want a copy later, hand-drawn with a mouse. But this is the process. This is the LeanUX process, essentially, as it breaks down, regardless of what environment you work in, whether it's startup or a corporate environment or you're in school. The idea is to create a concept, get quick validation for that concept, create a prototype as quickly as possible so you get an actual experience, test that with customers. Customers are the ultimate arbiter of validity. Learn from that behavior and then iterate again. Now you've got to run this cycle as many times as you can, as quickly as possible. And the idea, so let's start here with concept. The idea of a concept is when you're communicating as a designer, think about your audience. What do they need to know? And then create the lowest fidelity artifact that you need to create to communicate your idea. So this actual thing here could be enough to communicate an idea to your developer on your team, or to a stakeholder, to a business owner, or to your professor, right? This could be enough. And if it's not, you'll find out pretty quickly, and then you'll take it to the next level of fidelity. But the idea is to create the lowest fidelity artifact that you can to communicate your concept about how you're going to solve the particular design problem that you're currently facing. Take that concept and start validating it internally with your boss, with your engineers, with your fellow designers, with your stakeholders, with your product owners, with marketers, whoever that is that you're dealing with on a regular basis. Go seek them out. Okay? Instead of sitting behind your desk, go seek them out and say, hey, I'm thinking about solving this business problem this way. Does this make sense to you? Oh no, why not? Or maybe so. But the idea is to start getting that insight. And as soon as you get enough of an idea that you're heading down a path that the company is comfortable with or that your organization is comfortable with, create a prototype. And create that prototype so that you can experience the workflow. And maybe it's just the primary bits of the workflow specifically. But the idea is to get an experience out there and then go out to your customers and show them that experience as soon as you can. And repeat this over and over and over again. This could take a week. You could, depending on the complexity or the regulations of the industry that you're in, this may take a month, or you could do this in a half day and run this twice a day, or maybe even once an hour. And if you work in a waterfall world today, and you don't work in an Agile world, this could just be your UX process. Even during your design phase, this could be the way you work on a daily basis instead of waiting for these milestones in your design process moving forward. And I'm going to date myself a little bit with this next slide. But these are wise words. Anybody not recognize this movie? This is Better Off Dead. It's an 80s classic, and if you haven't seen it, you have to see it. So Charles DeMar, which is Curtis Armstrong down here, is teaching John Cusack up here how to ski. They're standing on top of a mountain, and they're looking straight down. It's a vicious hill, right? And he thinks he's going to die. And he's like, how do I do this? How do I ski? And so this is how he teaches him how to ski. He says, go that way, really fast. If something gets in your way, turn. Right? That's how he teaches them how to ski, and then he gives them a push and pushes them downhill. This is exactly what I'm talking about, though. Like, it's amazing that Curtis Armstrong was such a visionary in the 80s. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You are starting at a point. You know the problem that you have to solve. You have an idea in your head. Go towards that idea really fast. And then as soon as something gets in your way, you get some feedback that didn't work out, or you find out that the customers don't like it, or whatever the feedback is, as soon as something gets in your way, turn and keep turning and keep adjusting, because the goal here and what the Lean Startup methodology talks about is this concept of validated learning. So every design idea that you put out there is a hypothesis, and the sooner that you can prove or disprove that hypothesis, the sooner you're designing the right thing, or the more right thing. And so go that way really fast, and as soon as something gets in your way, turn and keep turning and keep turning. You'll get to the bottom of the hill eventually, just like when you're skiing, and when you get there, it'll be the more accurate product, the more correct product, because you're getting that constant feedback along the way. This is a critical piece, though, of the equation, is that no one's going to come ask you to do this. You have to do this as the designer. It's really fun and comfortable to go hide behind your monitor for days and weeks at a time and push the pixels and make sure they're perfect and make them look good. I know, I've done it. It's awesome. But this is not the way to make this work. You've got to make sure that you are designing the right thing, because if you spend 3 months behind your monitor designing something that nobody wants, then you've wasted 3 months of time. The sooner you can get out there and seek out your coworkers and your customers to ensure that you're building the right thing, the closer you get to validated learnings. And get your work out there in public. This is a board that we had for my team at the Ladders. We posted, these are wireframes essentially, sketches of ideas that we posted in public, in a public space in our office, and people would just walk past this and look at this stuff and provide feedback. Oh, you guys are working on this? We were working on that, something similar on this other product line. Maybe we can collaborate on it, or this is what worked well for us or didn't work well for us. But the idea is to push this out to your organization, to your teams as quickly as possible. So my assumption by now is that you're intrigued, and you're at least maybe bought a little bit of this. So how do you actually do this, right? I promised you that I would tell you specifically how to actually do this. So there's 5 things. These are like, if you're going to go back to work on Saturday, so Monday, if you're going to go back to work on Monday and try any of this, if this resonates with you, here are 5 ways that you can start doing this immediately when you get back to work on Monday. Here's the first thing. Strike a really meaningful pose with your team. No. This is solve problems as a team. Okay? In the waterfall world, the solutions are predetermined up front by some secret cabal of product managers and marketers and who knows what else, right? And then they're handed to designers, right? Solve problems together. A team is much more motivated to design and build a product solution that they came up with themselves than a solution that you hand them. And by actually having a conversation with them about how we're going to solve this problem and how we're going to build the solution, they start to build a shared understanding of where the project is heading. And the more we can build on that shared understanding, why are we doing this? How are we going to do it? what are we going to try? What technologies are we going to try to do? Where's the data going to come from? What data do we need? The sooner that they can get this insight, the sooner they can start working. And the less dependency they have on the specification documents that you have to write. So those start to shrink because they know what's coming. They're solving the problem with you together. Designers, developers, product managers, whoever needs to get in there. And one of the best tools to facilitate these types of activities with these cross-functional teams is sketching. Okay? Sketching is a wholly important and valuable process to getting your teams working together and solving problems together because it's malleable, it's temporary, it's disposable, it takes no time, and everybody can do it. And if you need to, and if people say, well, I can't draw, this is not drawing. I mean, this may be drawing, but sketching is not drawing. Sketching is solving a problem together visually. It's articulating visually some sort of solution. And so you can reveal to them the secret, and I don't know if you've, Christian, if you've revealed the secret of interaction design to your students yet. I may. What year are they, sophomores? So the secret of interaction design is that if you can draw a circle, a square, and a triangle, you can draw every interface that's currently available out there today. That's the secret of interaction design. You can sketch every interface with a circle, a square, and a triangle, for the most part. Right? So if your team says they can't draw, ask them if they can draw those 3 geometrical shapes, level the playing field, and have them participate. Because here's the benefits that come from that. This is a sketch that I spent 2 hours working on with a developer. He and I stood at this board, and we sketched ideas for a solution to a problem that we had. And we erased the board 1,000 times, and we rewrote it, and he drew some of this, and I drew some of that, and we worked together to figure out, okay, where are the pieces going to go? What is this data? Where's it going to come from? What are we going to do over here? You know, et cetera. And we worked on this for 2 hours. 2 hours. And when we left this sketching session together, we solved this problem together. He started building, and I started designing from here. So we were able to work in that parallel path. I didn't have to write a single thing for him from moving forward from this. If he had questions, he came over and he talked to me. And then when we got to the end, 2 weeks later, so that kicked off our 2-week cycle. When we got to the end, this is what the end product looked like in 2 weeks. And if you go back for a second, you can see that all those components are still there, right? There's a headshot with a message box, 3 columns of data, and a header and a footer, and all that stuff is still there. There's the headshot, there's the message box, and this is what came out of it. We built this in 2 weeks because we kicked off the process with that sketching session, and we built that shared understanding about how we were going to solve this problem together. There was no spec for that 2 weeks at all. There was conversation, there was collaboration, there was sketching, there was collaborative problem solving, but there was no spec. And all of that took place in a very short amount of time. So sketching is extremely powerful. I'm going to talk about this a lot throughout the night, but you have to prototype. And prototyping, people will tell you they have a favorite tool, or this, or don't use this, or don't use that. Like, build a cookie for all that matters. Get the experience into people's hands somehow. The legend of the legend, I think it's fact actually, Jeff Hawking, the Palm guy. Like, he walked around with a wooden block in his pocket because nobody was walking around with that kind of stuff in their pocket. He just wanted to see if that was a viable way of transacting in the world. Get your experience out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about prototyping in a bit. Pairing up. Agile promotes, one flavor of Agile is extreme programming, and it promotes developer pair development, where 2 developers sit together and work at the same terminal. I'm talking about cross-functional pairing, and the point of cross-functional pairing is this. You get your developer and your designer to sit together and build an interface together in real time, perhaps designing in the browser. This is not an everyday type of activity, but when you've got enough of an idea or enough of a basis to work from, you sit them next to each other and they start to learn from each other. Hey, I'd like to move the button over here. Oh, really? Why do you want to move the button over there? Well, I think it makes more sense because of blah, blah, blah. Or, but I can't do that for you because it relies on this logic. And so that back and forth starts to build transparency into the development process, into the design process. And that transparency builds trust between those 2 people. They start to learn how each other works, what each other needs, and they get to an end state together. And when they get to that end state, they have a product. not a document describing a product. They have a product code, and we do this. You can do this with whatever. We did this with Firebug, which is a Firefox plugin. If you guys are familiar with it, it allows you to manipulate JavaScript, HTML, CSS in real time and see the changes on screen. And then you've got code at the end of it. But I'm sure all the browsers have some equivalent of this. And there's additional benefits here. So the first thing is you're empowering your developers, right? And by that sense, but you're setting your designers free. So for the more basic problems, right? You can say, hey, developer, you remember that form that we built last week? I need another form just like it, just with these labels. And they can go off and start building that while you, the designer, are solving perhaps maybe a more challenging interaction design problem. So it sets you free if you can trust them, right? They know what to do. They know how to build it. And you can trust them to move on. You can work on something a bit more challenging. So if you're resource constrained, this is a really good way to go as well. The fifth tactic of making LeanUX work, and this is critical, this is absolutely critical, is to build a style guide. And if you call it a component library or a pattern library or whatever you want to call it for your organization, but build that style guide. If it's made out of pixels and it's part of your application, of your product, put it in here. Color palettes, buttons, words, links, anything, and how it behaves, and codify it in there. And make sure that it's a living, breathing thing. So we did this in a wiki, so that you could actually build, you can actually update this and make it a living, breathing component of your site. Now these days people are working with live style guides, where actually this is using live CSS and live HTML, and if you make changes in the style guide, it deploys across your entire applications. But these components allow you to create all those prototypes and all those experiences very, very quickly, because inevitably, you're going to get to a basic set of building blocks for your application. Whether you have one now or whether you'll have one in the future, you're going to have those basic building blocks. And once you have them, you can start to put together approximations of future experiences very, very quickly. And when you can put together those approximations, people can click through them. And you can prototype them, and you can give people the opportunity to click through your new ideas. And so you can build these libraries that allow you to create prototypes very, very quickly. Everything goes in there, and then add code snippets in here so people can click through it. We've done this with Fireworks, where you actually build an asset library in Fireworks, and we've added the code bits later. It's tremendously powerful. It empowers the cross-functional pairing, the prototyping, it empowers everything. So this is really critical. So digging in a little deeper, just to give you a sense of what LeanUX specifically is, its critique. It's early and often on designs that don't feel finished. So if you were used to designing a complete thing and then showing it, this is going to feel uncomfortable. You have to show things that are less than complete, specifically. And I love this graphic here from Cassie McDaniel. She wrote this in a list apart back in January of 2011, where she talks about how designers often feel like they may have to get it right the first time, and they actually don't. And the critique process helps you get there very, very quickly. Right? Ideally, we have a problem to solve. The first thing that comes out of the gate is the right idea, but that's not actually the case. Typically, the first thing you do is going to miss the mark to some extent, right? So the sooner you can get out there and get that feedback, you can actually curve more towards your objectives much more quickly. Control, and this is getting back again. You're getting all this feedback. You're getting it from a variety of different sources. It feels like you're designing by committee. How do you maintain control? And the way we used to maintain control was the spec, right? But what happens in the waterfall process, well, like I said before, if it's in the spec, it's going to get built, and that never happens, actually. It's never going to get built, right? And so the spec is really the beginning point of negotiation with the rest of your team. You've written the spec, you then hand it off to developers, they read it, and they're like, nah, we can't build this, right? And so then you whittle it down and whittle it down. You've wasted all that time creating it. The spec doesn't give you that control. It's actually getting out there and making sure that your team understands what you're building and why you're building it that helps you maintain that control. And you need to communicate those reasons back out to your team. So thank you for your feedback, developer. I chose to not use it because of X, Y, and Z, but here's what I did instead and why I think that's a better solution. But you've got to maintain that conversation with your team on a regular basis. Momentum. In the original, in that waterfall world, the design phase itself was this black box. Requirements went in one end, Photoshop documents came in the other end, everything else in the middle was a black box. No one knew where the project was or where it was headed. With this LeanUX approach, you're constantly checking back out with your team. Hey, we designed this today. We designed this. What do you guys think? And then this is what we're going to do tomorrow. And that process keeps people engaged because they know what's going on and they know where you're headed and where you're moving with the design work itself. So it gives this sense of momentum to the project, whereas before it felt like it kind of stagnated for each cycle of the waterfall phase. Quality. a lot of questions I get about this is how do I maintain this pace and maintain the quality of my designs? And I love this quote, actually. Do you guys know who Jason Fried is from 37 Signals? It's a software company out in Chicago. They build Basecamp, high-rise, Campfire. Anyway, super lean. They talk about how to really minimize everything. This is Jason. He's the CEO. Speed first, aesthetics second. And I firmly believe in this, right? Get something out there and then polish it and make sure you're building the right thing over and over again. So I gave this to my team back at the Ladders, and this was the response that I got back. Right? And the idea here was that, hey, we keep running for third. Like, if I work this way, speed first, aesthetics second, I feel like I'm going for the bronze. I'm never doing gold medal work, right? We never get to do the best work that we absolutely can. And it's true. My friend Stu Eccles, who runs an agency in London called Made by Many, he always says it's not iterative if you only do it once, right? And that's exactly true. If you were only doing this once, then yes, I would agree that you're going for the bronze. But you're taking an iterative process and you're going through those cycles as quickly as possible to get to an end state. And so this graphic has been used for a bunch of different things. I really like to use it to illustrate this point, because if my requirements, if my business problem to you was build me an outdoor recreation facility for my kids, and you went away as a designer and came back 6 months later and built me this thing here, only to find out later that I'm afraid of roller coasters, right? I don't have the budget to build it, much less do I ever want to ride one, then you've wasted time and you've failed in the project. But if you ran out really quickly and bought 3 pieces of wood and two pieces of rope and like, hey, I did this, what do you think? I'd be like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure it's going to work for me, but here's some feedback, and then you kept iterating, and eventually got to the tire swing. You'd get there much more quickly, much more accurately, and you'd solve the business problem, which is the business that we're all in, is solving business problems. The goal, too, is to get between minimally viable and minimally desirable. So both of these things actually solve the same problem to a certain extent, right? They get 2 people talking to each other, but you have to get to a point where people actually want to buy your product, and that iteration builds that eventual quality into this. So over time, you could argue that we've iterated from tin cans to the iPhone, but the idea is that through iterations, you get better and better and better. You've got to do these quickly and learn from your customers what works and what doesn't. Feasibility, making sure it can be built and built well. Again, I'm going to beat up on prototyping. Prototyping, pick a core experience of what you're building, get it out there, validate it with your team, and then they can get started. You don't need any additional deliverables to get started. You may need to articulate edge cases in deliverables. You may need to articulate error cases, user states, etc. But at least everybody can get started. Because what happens when I click that button? Go ahead and click the button in the prototype. You don't have to read anything to get started. Customer validation. This is, again, your design is a hypothesis. The faster you can get your design out in front of customers, the faster that you can actually find out whether you're designing the right thing. And so one of the fastest ways of doing this is to get qualitative insight through usability testing. And that's bringing people either into your office and showing them your work in whatever form that it's in, or going out to find them and showing it to them on a device of some kind, but getting your experience in front of customers and getting that feedback. And this starts to give you some qualitative insight. And you can do this on a very rapid scale. We did usability testing every Thursday at the Ladders. We did 3 people. So some people tell you to do 5 people, see 8 people, see 16. We did 3 people every Thursday because we can get that done in a half day. It was cheap, and we got enough feedback to know where the big boulders were in the road of the applications and the flows that we were building. And so that was super helpful for us. And we were able to do that on a weekly basis, so we were never more than 4 or 5 business days away from the next customer validation session. And then when you partner that qualitative insight with quantitative insight, you do that with A/B testing. So the idea is you take different versions of your ideas, or different mock-ups, or different ways of testing words or button links or colors, and you run different versions of it, and you segment people into those randomly. And then once you get statistical significance, you get quantitative insight to back up your qualitative insight. So qualitative tells you what people are doing on the site. Tells you why people are doing things on the site, while the quantitative tells you what they're actually doing. So, hey, people are always clicking the red button, and then you can bring them in the lab. It's like, well, I see the red button better, or it was placed better. You get that insight from these A/B testing platforms. There are, and the final thing is that you're filling in the gaps. The more you're talking to these folks, so the documents you used to create try to cover all the gaps and all the edge cases and all the use cases. When you're having these conversations together, you're filling in the gaps together. You're saying, oh, did you think about that user state? Or what happens when somebody comes in and they're not signed in? right? Those conversations allow you to either complete your prototype or to document something that you need, but the conversations that you're having help to build that shared understanding, and that's really what this is all about, is getting everybody talking about the same thing at the same time. And really, it doesn't matter what the form factor is, right? So PayPal launched their mobile payment solution recently, and they worked in a very quick and iterative way, and it doesn't matter whether it's mobile, and you don't have to wait for the App Store to test it. You can do paper prototyping, you can do fake prototyping, but the idea is to get the feedback very, very quickly and to show you exactly what that, how you can actually do that in a very lean way. This is Meetup.com's mobile usability testing rig. It cost them $28 to build this thing. So Meetup's based in New York. They do a ridiculous amount of usability testing, like silly, silly amounts. Thousands of tests. This is their mobile testing rig. Okay, you guys know what this is right here? It's a paint stirrer, right? With electrician's tape around it, right? It's a lamp and a stand of some kind and a webcam. $28, right? They didn't have to build anything fancy. Somebody comes into their office, they can play with their mobile app, and they can get some feedback. So the idea is that you have to rent out a lab with two-way mirrors and hire people and spend tens of thousands of dollars. There's a place and a time for that, but to get these quick validation cycles, you can get out there in $28, super, super quick. And there are online tools that help you prototype things as well. This is one I was testing out recently called Proto.io. It's not bad, but it gives you a sense of that mobile experience. So two quick things about what LeanUX actually is not, and this is a question I got a lot. LeanUX is not lazy. Okay, you don't actually get a. This does not give you a pass on doing less interaction design. Okay, cats win the internet every time, right? But this is not a pass to do less work. Sorry. Okay, and I love this quote. So this is a gentleman, an interaction designer down in Texas. His name is Austin Gavella, and he was commenting on this blog post that Whitney Hess wrote called "Why I Detest the Term LeanUX." Okay, and he's talking about this. This is great. He says the best part is that the team is doing a whole lot of UX, right? They document a ton of stuff explicitly on the walls, so that's the whiteboards that he's talking about, and implicitly in that shared understanding. And if you take nothing away, please, implicitly in that shared understanding among the team members, through the conversations that we're having. That's exactly what's happening here, right? So it's not lazy. You're still doing a ton of work. What you're doing is you're taking the waste out, specifically, right? Instead of deploying the entire arsenal of UX tools at full capacity at each and every project, you're picking what makes sense in this period of time and to what depth you want to deploy. Do you need usability testing? Well, okay, well, do we need to hire a lab and pay $25,000 for 2 days of recruiting and everything? Or can we actually just spend $600, get 3 people in here on Thursday, and get some feedback? So just think about how you're deploying your tool set. You still have the whole tool set at your disposal. And then the other thing this is not is designed by committee, specifically. This is about you as the designer taking all this feedback, synthesizing it, and then communicating back out to your team and saying, this is what I've taken, this is what I've tossed, and here's why. And that communication loop has to flow both ways, or people are going to get resentful. Hey, I'm giving you all this feedback, and it never makes it into the design. Okay? Here's why it didn't make it into the design. And I'm going to test it next week, and if it's wrong, we'll try it your way. Right? So there's always the customer to arbitrate subjective arguments. So I want to go through a couple quick scenarios of specific organizations and project types, close with a case study, and then we'll do a bunch of Q&A. So can you do this where you work? If you work you're an in-house designer in a corporation of some kind, this is absolutely within your power to do. You may not be able to shift your entire culture, so start small and ask for forgiveness. Find an internal project, but tomorrow or Monday when you get to work, draw a concept, draw a sketch, grab a developer, and start the conversation flowing. It's amazing when teams start to work this way and it starts to click and they see the benefits, other teams get jealous and they start to look in and they're like, hey, what are you guys doing and how are you working this way? So let's work on that. You can take those risks specifically on internal projects. Because here's the thing, when you work in-house, right, you're in the problem-solving business and you're not going to solve problems with that documentation. You're going to solve it with working software. That's what solves business problems. If you work in a startup, this is the only way to work. There's no one to hide behind. Typically, you're wearing multiple hats. You've got engineers want to code. Product needs to get out there. TechCrunch needs to write about it. You know, this is the only way to work. You've got to work in these rapid cycles. get testing, get validation, make sure that you're not burning the valuable fund, the money you just raised, by building the wrong thing or designing the wrong thing. If you work in an agency, agencies, and this is exactly what Christian said during the intro, it's a tougher sell for one very clear reason, is that the overwhelming majority of agencies are in the deliverables business. That's what they sell. Christian said they sold $20 million worth of specs. That's exactly what they sell. I've sold $600,000 specs as well. You know, there's a thud factor when you sell a 600,000 spec. It has to make a sound, a specific weight, you know, when it hits the desk, right? But that's it. That's to get this to work in an agency world, you've got to rework the process a little bit. So this was the process that I showed you earlier, right? And this was the concept, validate, prototype, test. You have to work this a little bit differently in an agency world if you work inside an agency itself. And it kind of looks like this. And essentially it entails taking your client and making them a part of your team. So you have to set those expectations up front and say, client, we're going to work together differently on this. I'm going to require that you have twice weekly 15-minute meetings with me, or thrice weekly 15-minute meetings with me. And what we're going to talk about during those meetings is what we worked on yesterday, and show you some stuff that's probably going to be a lot lower fidelity than you're used to seeing. And you're going to give us some feedback, and we're going to iterate. And we're going to show you every 2 days the progress that we're making. And what happens with this process specifically is that your client starts to become a member of your team. They start to see the fingerprints in their work, because at some point, some of their feedback is going to make it into the design. And they're going to say, oh, I told them to put the navigation over there, or I told them to put the search box over there. And they're going to see that work, and they're going to start to own it. And when you have a client that feels like they own the product with you, they're much more likely to defend it when their manager comes in and practices a little bit of seagull management. Do you guys know what that is, seagull management? That's when the big boss comes in and swoops and poops on everything. Right? Swoops in, takes a dump on it. And typically the agency would just get thrown under the bus for that. Your contact would be like, well, I didn't do it, the agency did it. But they own this. They're much more likely to defend it. So make them a part of your team. And I've seen this work specifically. If you're a freelancer, you know, I think you're like a mini agency in many ways. If you're a consultant, if you've got 1 or 2 clients, you can maintain this pace with them. If you're managing 3 or 4 or 5 clients, you're going to have to fall back on documentation to really make that work. So it's really an attention level type of thing. And ultimately, you have to rethink your business model. There's a lot of pushback on this that says, hey, if I'm going to deliver fewer things, I'm going to bill fewer hours, I'm going to make less money. And what I say is that you actually can deliver projects faster. You're going to have happier, more empowered clients, and you're going to have better outcomes. They'll come hire you again and again. And if you truly want to be a partner with your client, put some skin in the game. And say, listen, I'm going to build you time and materials to launch the best product that we can in the time that we have. And when we hit the goal that we set out at the beginning of this project, increase revenues, increase sign-ups, sell more widgets, whatever it is, right, you're going to pay me a bonus for hitting that. So get some skin in the game so that they feel like you're a part of the team. If you're working with distributed teams, which a lot of folks do, if they're a part of your company, in other words, it's just another office of your company in another place, another country. You can make this work through technologies like Skype. We've used Google Docs. I have a really interesting blog post on my blog about how we did a collaborative sketching session and card sorting exercises with Google Docs and Skype with offices in New York and Vancouver. If you want to read that, you can make this work. If you're working with third-party vendors that you're simply building your stuff and they're not actually a part of your company, LeanUX breaks down because that vendor needs to know exactly what they need to build and how they're going to get paid when they deliver that. So the process breaks down there. It doesn't work. So really quickly, what projects does this actually work well with? This slide makes no sense. It just defines my childhood, so I put it in here. Again, I grew up in the 80s, in case you couldn't tell. There is, if you have task flow-based projects that have a beginning and an end and some sort of outcome, this process works very, very well for that. You can test different flows, you can test different wordings, you can test different button labels, et cetera. You can make this work and you can iterate very, very quickly. So there's a beginning, there's an end, there's an outcome. If you're designing experiential marketing sites like this one that I designed years ago, you can't say it's for Reese's Puffs cereal. Right? The outcome here is a bit more nebulous, right? The real outcome is the kid pulling on the mom's or the dad's pant leg and saying, buy this for me, right? And that's more difficult to measure as a direct result of the website. So it's a bit more difficult to work in a lean fashion with these experiential sites, but maybe you can do a bit more sketching up front instead of digging directly into the pixel perfect stuff. If you're working with content-heavy experiences, You just need to know what your building blocks are before you can get started. So you just need to know that you've got a video feed coming from YouTube and an RSS feed coming from the AP and so forth. As long as you know what your content pieces are and where they're coming from, you can start blocking out the experiences together. So it's just a little bit of upfront understanding that you need to do. And so I promised you a case study, and I'm going to get to it, and then I'm going to wrap up and we can take a bunch of questions. And I call this case study 100 Days of Collaboration because that's approximately how long the project took from beginning to end. And this is at the ladders. So you remember that diagram at the beginning about the pain and the negative environment and the failure and how everybody jumped out the window. This is called 100 Days of Collaboration. And the ladders is a subscription job service, and it used to be for 100K plus employees and employers only. And so this was the problem statement that we were trying to solve. People like, you're like Monster, but I have to pay for it. We're a subscription service. Everybody paid to read job listings and to apply for them. And people didn't understand why they had to pay for it. And so what we did was we took this LeanUX idea and we shut down the entire job seeker side of the business. We had a job seeker side and a recruiter side. And we took the entire job seeker side of the business and shut it down for 3 days. Everybody that worked in that business shut it down. It's 50 people. Shut it down for 3 days. And we gave them, for each one of the days, we gave them a theme that they had to work on and to solve for. The first day was, hey, how do we acquire and convert customers? The second day was, how do we get them to know and to purchase resume services? We're a resume rewriting business. And how do we get them to know that we have, one of the differentiators that you pay money for is that there's a human in every one of these interactions. So if you have an issue, you've got a person that you can talk to. So we shut everybody down, 50 people, for 3 days, and we had them start drawing together and sketching together. And we put them in a room, a big room, 7 teams of 7 people roughly. And just to give you a sense, I know these folks personally. Like this is a developer. She's a resume writer. He's a call center manager. Actually, I can't figure out who this is, but if they're weeping like this, it's probably a designer, right? Of some kind, right? I don't know who that is. But look what they're doing. They're sketching, they're drawing, they're solving problems together. And over the course of 3 days, we began to fill up the walls with these ideas. And these are people talking to each other. It's a product manager and a developer solving problems together, looking at these sketches. And after 3 days, we had a wall full of stuff, tons and tons of ideas. And so we took a little bit of time, a day or two, and we boiled things down to this. So we deduped and we picked out what were the most promising ideas from that session of 50 people, and we boiled it down to this. And what you can see in here, what's I think is really amazing, and I'll see if my little laser works. I don't know if it works. It doesn't work. What you can see here, it says 2P, 3P, 5P. These are points. These are agile estimates. These are estimates for how much effort it takes to actually start this work. Our engineers were estimating this work from the sketches. This was the spec. This is it. It was up in a conference room. And the only way that they could possibly have ever been able to do that estimation and to start working from this was to be a part of the ideation, the conception process of this LeanUX approach. Everybody solved these ideas together. And we started from this, and we built this experience. And when we ended up was here. Right? This was the homepage that launched at the time. This homepage lived up there for a year, which is a really long time in the life cycle of that company. And if you look back here for a second, you can see these things. You can see there are people here and people here. There are people throughout the experience. And when you were the resume rewriter who had this idea, or the marketing manager who drew the sketch, and you see this page, you feel pride and this productivity. And this was a successful project. And this was taking the entire department and getting them to work collaboratively towards an end state that was successful for the entire company. It's still held up as one of the biggest successes at that company from a process and from a project-wise. And so this is my final 80s reference, I promise. Greatest American Hero? Yeah? Right on. Designers are used to being heroes, right? Designers love to come in and say, wow, that's really hard, let me make it beautiful, and then I'm going to get the hell out of here, right? LeanUX is distinctly anti-hero. It's a collaborative, team-based approach to working. And really what it is, it's taking design thinking and it's bringing it to a much broader audience, right? And when you bring design thinking to this broader audience of stakeholders and developers and customers and so forth, you're creating empathy where there was none before, specifically for the customer. Maybe your developers never thought of the customer. Maybe your marketing people never thought of the customer, right? For the problem space, like what are you actually solving? Like why am I writing this code, or why am I writing this requirement, or why am I designing this, right? There's empathy for the problem space. And then ultimately, and this is a fringe benefit of all this, you're creating empathy for the design discipline. You're letting people into your world You're showing them how you work and how you solve problems and how hard design is. And there's an appreciation that starts to build for the design process itself. And so the bottom line is that this is an evolution, right? This is not a revolution. Times are changing. We need to move our process and our thinking along with it. And so LeanUX is the next step in this, and there'll be another process after that, another process after that. But this is the way to move forward and work in this world. Thank you guys very much. I'd love to take your questions. I'm just going to put a little more water in my cup here. But if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. Yes, sir.
But I'll ask after yours. Sorry. Okay. Awesome presentation, kind of great. But I'm having trouble figuring out how this is different from, say, your typical B-school design process, or just a design process in general, or Lean Startup. What makes this different aside from having the UX in the title?
The specifics. So in many cases. So listen. First of all, if you're working this way, congratulations. It's a great work. The biggest differentiation here is that the design process is opened up to a broader audience from the beginning. There's a greater interaction between the different disciplines. There is a greater value placed on early and often customer validation. There is a focus on making sure that you're designing the right thing and not something that somebody doesn't want. And so there's an understanding that you're going to make mistakes and that you're going to learn from those mistakes and iterate quickly. So whereas in a very traditional spec-heavy waterfall process, it's heads-down design for 3 months, then it's heads-down development for as long as it takes to build that. Maybe there's some usability testing at some point, and then you launch it, right? And then you get some validation in the marketplace.
True, but isn't that the same thing Eric says in Lean Startup? You have process, very awesome team, validate early, validate, all that kind of stuff. And what is? Sorry, about that. But where's the UX piece here? If we're saying like UX, this is interdisciplinary, it's cross-functional. What really separates this as the evolution step forward?
This is taking the user experience process and reducing it to a much more minimal approach, so that you can validate these learnings early. Now, this is how to plug user experience and interaction design into the Lean Startup approach, and then apply it in a variety of different contexts. You still seem skeptical. Follow up with me afterwards, and we'll catch up.
My question is about your test subjects. How do you recruit for your test subjects, and do you feel that only 3 people is enough to give high-quality data for for whatever you're testing?
So we recruit test subjects. We actually outsource that to an external recruiter who would find somebody for us. We'd tell her on Monday who we wanted to see. She would find them for us by Thursday, and that was something that we valued as a good use of our money, because we didn't have a dedicated user researcher on our team. And so having somebody come in and, farming that out saved the time from somebody like an interaction designer on my team from having to make those phone calls, and it's just a big headache. Now, 3 people, is that enough? No, it's not enough for high quality data, but it's enough to get a sense of whether or not there is a boulder in the road to the particular, a boulder or two. Within 3 people, 4 people max, you start to really see a pattern of whether or not the core workflow that you're trying to create is actually working for your target audience. So, and that was enough. And then we could iterate on that very quickly, either in between participants or in between that and the next session, and then a week later you're getting further validation of that.
I love the approach. I think it puts the design itself central again, not the process. Steve Blank talks about this in terms of the startup too, as you're constantly validating the model. I have a question about, so Steve Jobs had this quote, and I don't know, maybe I misunderstood the quote, but the quote was something like, hey, he didn't really actually believe that customers knew what they wanted, that he knew, I guess maybe he thought that when he's innovating, that maybe customer never has seen something before that he's creating, that maybe he shouldn't test stuff with them as much. I don't know if maybe I misunderstood his quote, but he almost said he doesn't even like testing with customers because he's building something that maybe they've never seen.
There's no harm in talking to your customers. Ultimately, right? They're the ones who are ultimately going to have to use your product, buy it, recommend it, etc. So, I mean, unless you're Steve Jobs, which few of us are, then there's no harm in talking to your customers. Yes, sir.
I'm currently working in an environment like this as the user researcher.
Yeah.
And so our product is very process oriented, and it's actually a fundamental redesign of our existing product, because there was no UX prior. And so the challenge that I'm facing is that with these really tight time constraints, our designers are doing a really great job of doing balsamic mock-ups and like kind of concepts of click-throughs, like supporting the PDFs. But my challenge is I'm not sure if I should be pushing for higher functional prototypes where my customers would be typing in numbers to get that real experience. And the reason why I say that is because when I did my initial test, I had them click through this and I said, well, is there anything missing from this? Is there something wrong with this? You know, is there a problem that you would see? And they're like, no, this is great. This is so easy.
Right.
But there were huge problems. They were just thinking that because it's this redesign, we're making it awesomer, and you know, it solved all the problems before. So from your experience, should I be pushing for like to get a real prototyper in, or is there? I mean, can you speak to anything about that?
So I think as you're getting feedback and learning, the fidelity of the thing that you're showing to your customers should increase over time.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. Is like you start with like a basic kind of like functional prototype, meaning like maybe they click through, but then you keep incrementing over that and iterating over that same type of prototype. Is that right?
Yes. So exactly. So there's increasing functionality, or maybe you've actually launched something and they can click through it. But the idea is each time you're learning something, refine, and then hopefully you can increase the fidelity. So maybe you went from a paper prototype to a balsamic wireframe clickable thing, and then maybe you went to a Axure prototype, and then maybe you went to an actual HTML prototype, and maybe some, and then.
So the prototype should be also increasing.
Absolutely. I mean, the tools that are available today can make that super easy to move forward.
Really great talk. I have a question in terms of the whole Agile, like integration LeanUX and Agile. And you said that that's another way of how UX can be applied in an Agile process. But when I listen to what you talk today, and then there's the Agile process. So basically, the question is, do you still have UX working together in the Agile process? Like, does the real Agile process still exist in that way?
I think so. I don't see why not. I think this is the way to integrate user experience interaction design into an Agile process. Now, there needs to be significantly less upfront design time to facilitate the sprints, but there's still some that's in there. But this is all about working into that process. And the goal, really, in that sense, is the more of that shared understanding that you can build, the closer you can get the entire team working in a parallel path. So instead of that serial path where it's like product manager, designer, developer, QA, the more that you can build that shared understanding, everybody can start working from the same starting point. So that sketch that I showed you earlier, where the developer and I worked on it together, we were able to start working from there at the same time on the same problem, and reach the end state essentially at the same time as well, working in a parallel path. He didn't have to wait for me to create a design and then to have the design codified in paper and then have him then go build from that. So that facilitated that process for us.
Also, do you still see the designers taking part in like the sprint process itself? Like
it's absolutely critical.
User stories and all that.
Absolutely critical. You're a part of the team, so you have to be there. Yes, ma'am. You.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay.
It's you. Yeah.
Okay. So I understand how to work, the UX person works within the Agile team. But have you ever been in a situation where there's the bigger UX group, and how you work with your UX group that you have to kind of check in with, like you have your UX director, your manager, who also kind of needs to be involved. You have all these other stakeholders that are a part of it. So how do you manage that whole process?
So it's a great question. How do you manage a kind of a complex, multi-tiered user experience group in a large organization and still continue to work this way? So I'm going to give you the ideal answer, and then I'll kind of give you the realistic point of view. So the ideal answer is that you've got empowered teams that don't have that aren't afraid to fail, right? So what I mean by empowered teams is a team that can actually make a decision and potentially even implement that decision, right? That's an empowered team. And the way that you do that is you can actually do that through these A/B testing platforms. So if you have an idea about how to solve a particular problem, but you've got 150 million users and you don't necessarily want to deploy this test to 150 million people, you can split that off to a smaller subsection of your population and see how that works, learn from that, and iterate, and then increasingly open up the funnel to more people running through that particular process. And then there has to be an environment that empowers that team to not fear for their jobs in case they screw that up. So that allows them to iterate quickly and move faster. That's the ideal situation, right? Because then you don't necessarily have to get every design decision approved, right? Because again, the arbiter of success is your customer. Now, in a realistic situation, there has to be some level of communication up through your design management chain. Now again, if there is this kind of heavy review process that's built into the process, into your company, it's going to be very challenging to move quickly. So I don't have a really great answer as far as, like, there will be some challenges in pushing through these lightweight ideas on a faster basis. However, if you can do a good job of communicating and managing up through your design chain, then you can start to say, okay, listen, we sketched this out yesterday, the developers are on board, we're going to refine this over the next couple of days, I'll check back in with you on Wednesday and let you know. They just become another stakeholder that you need to communicate with on a regular basis. And that has a chance of working. I don't know, it depends on the person and specifically how much control they want to have over every pixel. But you have to maintain an open line of communication with your entire design chain. If there's multiple levels to it, it starts to break down. Yes?
So this is a great process, and I like the way you laid it out. I'm actually working this way on a lot of my projects, where they're more feature-oriented and they're fairly well-defined, and you're sort of ready to go with the concept phase. What I'm thinking about right now is like a much bigger sort of redesign project, and that you're not really ready to go at the concept phase, like things like defining the business goals or understanding who the primary users are, sort of need to come first. Like, is there a way to supplement this process, like to do those type of understand phase things in a lean way?
So the Lean Startup book is all about making sure that you're solving the right problem. So read that book. Like, that's okay, because Eric did a terrific job of laying that out. So that book is all about validating whether or not you're building the right problem and really, ensuring that you're actually solving a problem that exists. So that'd be my recommendation to you specifically. Yes, sir.
I think the question she's kind of getting at is the idea of segmented design versus iterative design. And I think a lot of people well, I think that the issue is that a lot of people talk about agile design and experience and having done agile development. I've been working with agile development companies for many years, and they've been, unfortunately, in some ways, it seems like they're driving the product design, where user experience without having a strongly proclaimed process has been driven by engineering, where what they call iterations is actually segments. So you take these 10 different parts of your product, chop it up, and you develop little bits at a time, and the problem is you're actually asking the designers to design these different sprints kind of out of order at a very kind of narrow and deep way of designing, rather than thinking about it broad and shallow. Like, what is the big problem we're trying to solve, and how does that work across the entire product? Trying to get an understanding of how this works. And so I think often when we're talking about iterations, people misunderstand the concept of, oh, we're trying to solve this big problem, design this feature, and we can go out and test that and validate with users. In reality, what's happening in a lot of development shops is they're designing, okay, we'll design login and search results, and let's go test that with users, and it's totally pointless.
So where that breaks down. Yeah. So where that breaks down. So the question is pretty much. I mean, this is. I think we touched on this briefly over here. Is that designers have to be a part of the process, right? You can't be external to the process. It's not a successful way of working if the team is if one portion of the organization is making decisions and then it doesn't necessarily make sense for somebody else. So if you're working in an Scrum environment that it seems like it's dev-driven, your designers have to be a part of that conversation. Because if they're not, then the exact symptoms that you're talking about will manifest, right? Well, I want to build this first because it's the most difficult thing to build. But it may not actually have any customer value, right? Or it may be that it's 3 layers deep into the navigation and we haven't designed the 2 layers above it, right? Those conversations will never happen if the designer is not there. The designer has to be a part of the prioritization process, the estimation process, and has to be consulted when there are changes in those things. And if you're not a part of that, then that's exactly when it becomes a dev-driven process. So that has to happen on a regular basis.
To touch on the same subject one more time, when it comes to defining what problems you are solving, it seems like one way you talked about addressing that was to have this kind of 3-day session where you're going through.
So we knew what problem we were solving.
Okay, so before that, then, when you're trying to decide what problem you are going to solve, it seems like once you're inside of the Agile process, you don't have that kind of time, and instead you're thinking about, like we're talking about these search bars and whatnot. I've heard people say that maybe the design process has to begin 2 cycles ahead of Agile in order to have that time to do that kind of problem definition. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
So it really depends on who's doing problem definition in your organization. I mean, in many organizations, it's a product manager of some kind, but the Sprint Zero approach, which is what you're describing, which is starting ahead essentially, doesn't necessarily provide the same kind of benefits that people think it does. It just buys you time to perhaps think about the problem or ideate or come up with some sort of initial design pass. And really, what you want to do is make sure that you're solving the right problem. One of the most effective ways that I've found to make sure that you're aware of everything that's going on is to ensure that throughout the life, research is not a one-time event. Right? Research should be a constant stream. So qualitative research is constantly coming in, and then quantitative research is constantly coming in. So you've got analytics on your site, you've got usage stats, you've got customer feedback coming in, you've got customer service folks talking to customers on the phone every day, you've got tech support that are fielding complaints. There's all of these, there are new competitors launching in your marketplace. Typically that's a product manager's job to get in there and to be on top of that and to kind of stay on top of emerging problems that we then need to define and move forward with. And that's really kind of where you can get into a little bit of early problem statement validation once they start to notice those patterns specifically, which the Lean Startup book talks about specifically. Yes, ma'am.
Where engineering is practicing Agile and the UX seem to really squeezed in the sense of documentation, even for QA reasons.
Yeah.
So how do you address in this process QA the product?
Questions, how do you include quality assurance in this product? First of all, make them part of the team. So they are a member of the team just like anybody else. So they start to stew in the shared understanding along with everybody else. That's the first thing. The second thing, the prototypes have worked really well. Hey, what should this do? Click the button to see what it does. And then they will very quickly point out bugs and say, well, what about this edge case or that edge case? And you may have to rely on some documentation in that case. But if you're building this, so look, when you've got a QA person on your team and they're aware of what you're building and why you're building it, they'll start to ask questions, and that's that conversation. It becomes a bit more challenging, significantly. And there's a level of documentation that you probably have to create. Again, if you're not having regular conversations with them, I understand that there's a 12.5-hour time difference between here and India, so it becomes very, very difficult to have a daily stand-up, for example, with somebody over there. It's a good question. I don't have a brilliant answer for it at the moment. It's a big challenge right now for a lot of organizations.
So you've had QA go ahead without documentation and essentially kind of make the calls on what's above and what's not?
In an Agile environment, yes, because we're working in 2-week cycles, right? So the scope of work for 2 weeks is manageable in that sense. If you're looking at 9 months worth of work or 18 months or 3 years worth of work, it's not manageable. But for 2 weeks, yeah, as long as they're part of the team, they're part of a daily stand-up, they're aware of what's being built, and they're in constant communication with the rest of that particular Scrum team, it's worked very effectively. Okay, one more, and then you can grab me afterwards. Yes.
Me?
Yes. Okay. Make it a good one.
Well, it will be. Okay. There's, I just want to sort of, there's been a couple of comments between this tension between Agile and Lean and how to integrate both and how to make them work well, especially when it comes to looking at a problem from a holistic way. Like if you have if you're overhauling a whole website, for example, you're talking about a rebrand, how do you make sure that once you split the pieces, because I was talking about segmentation, you don't lose track of the bigger picture. So you're sort of designing all these little pieces, and then when you start learning things, they don't come together, and it seems to get complex, especially when you have these 2-week sprints.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I think there's not a right answer because I think we're in the middle of that process, but I wonder what's your point of view between this tension of these methodologies?
I don't think there's a tension between them. I think they're complementary. I mean, I've heard it said, and I don't know how accurate this is, but I've heard it said that use Lean when you don't know what problem to solve, and Agile when you don't know how to solve it, that type of thing. But I don't think there's any tension between the two. Lean Startup specifically advocates for the use of Agile techniques to move in these rapid cycles. So I don't really see any tension. Really, what I was hoping to get across tonight is that user experience can fit into those processes and into these teams and work effectively to help those methodologies be even more successful. All right. Thank you guys very much.